It is Sunday evening, August 15th, 1971. Across the United States, millions of families are gathered in their living rooms, settling in to watch the most popular show on television, Bonanza. But the show never finishes. At 9 p.m. Eastern Time, the broadcast is interrupted. President Richard Nixon appears. He isn't there to discuss the war in Vietnam. He is there to announce a bankruptcy, though he won't use that word. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the American dollar into gold or other reserve assets. Temporarily. It is perhaps the most expensive lie in modern economic history. That specific Sunday marked the end of the post-war order. It was the moment money stopped being a title to a physical asset, gold, and became a political instrument of pure faith. History books often frame this as a technical correction to fight inflation. But documents from a secret meeting at Camp David, held just 48 hours prior with disconnected phones, reveal the truth. This was not a correction. It was a geopolitical coup. By shattering the Bretton Woods Agreement, the United States didn't just default on its obligations. It engineered a new system. A system that allowed them to export their inflation to the world and, as the data screens at us, break the contract with the American worker. Look at the data. Before 1971, if you worked harder, you earned more. After 1971, the link was severed. Nixon promised to save the dollar. Instead, he stole the gold, gave us paper, and changed the DNA of civilization. To understand the crime, we must understand the vault. In 1944, the world agreed to a system called Bretton Woods. The rules were simple. The U.S. dollar would be the world's anchor, backed by gold at $35 an ounce. It was meant to be a warehouse receipt. If you held a dollar, you held a claim on American gold. But throughout the 1960s, the United States discovered a flaw in the code, or rather, a loophole. They realized they could print more paper claims than they had gold in the vault. Under Presidents Johnson and Nixon, spending exploded. The Great Society welfare programs at home and the war in Vietnam abroad cost billions. But instead of raising taxes, which is politically painful, they simply printed the difference. Europe noticed. The French finance minister called this America's Exorbitant Privilege. The U.S. was buying Europe as factories and fighting wars with money they created out of thin air, essentially forcing other nations to pay for American dominance. So the bank run began. In 1965, President Charles de Gaulle did the unthinkable. He demanded physical payment. France began sending battleships to New York to redeem their paper dollars for real gold bars from Fort Knox. Other nations followed. By 1971, the U.S. gold supply had hemorrhaged. The vault was emptying. The math of Bretton Woods no longer worked. America had two choices: stop printing money and induce a severe depression, or change the rules of the game. As economist Chuck Ruth warned, the deficit could continue without tears, only as long as the world accepted the dollar without question. When that trust broke, Nixon didn't fix the discipline. He broke the thermometer. By all conventional laws of economics, the U.S. dollar should have died in the 1970s. Without gold backing it, the greenback was just paper. The world was awash in unwanted dollars. The logical outcome was hyperinflation and the collapse of American hegemony. But it didn't happen. Why? The answer lies in a controversial theory proposed by economist Michael Hudson in his seminal work, Superimperialism. Hudson argues that the U.S. pulled off a strategic miracle. They turned their greatest weakness, their debt, into their greatest weapon. Here is the mechanism. When countries like Germany or Japan exported cars to America, they were paid in dollars. But with the gold window closed, they couldn't cash those dollars out. They were stuck. To earn any interest on that pile of paper, their central banks had no choice but to buy used treasury bonds. Effectively, America forced its rivals to finance its own deficit. The money America spent to maintain military bases in Europe and Asia was borrowed from Europe and Asia. As Hudson put it, the breakdown of the gold standard was not a defeat. It was the dawn of a new form of empire. But one loose end remained. What if the world stopped needing dollars? Enter the petrodollar. In 1974, amidst the oil crisis, Secretary of State Henry Kissinger struck a deal that would define the next half-century. The arrangement was simple, yet brilliant. The U.S. promised military protection to the Saudi royal family. In exchange, Saudi Arabia agreed to price all its oil sales exclusively in U.S. dollars. Suddenly, every nation on earth needed dollars. Not because they liked America, but because they needed energy to survive. If Brazil, Japan, or France wanted oil, they first had to buy dollars. This created a permanent, artificial demand for the U.S. currency. This brings us to the central historical debate. Mainstream historians, like Jeffrey Garten, argue this was a pragmatic masterstroke that stabilized a volatile world and prevented a global depression. They see Nixon and Kissinger as architects of order. However, critics argue that this system came with a terrible moral cost. By allowing the U.S. to print money without consequence, the system devalued the labor of the American worker and exported inflation to the global South. It created a world where the financial sector, the handlers of this new money, became more powerful than the industrial sector, the creators of real things. The discipline of gold was replaced by the addiction of debt, and like any addiction, it felt good at first. But the withdrawal symptoms were simply pushed into the future. When we zoom out, the gravity of the situation becomes clear. We are living inside an anomaly. For 5,000 years, money was an asset. For the last 50 years, it has been a debt. By historical standards, the post-1971 system is a brief, fragile experiment. And the results of this experiment are now visible in your daily life. Economists call it the Cantillon effect, because new money is created at the top by central banks and governments. Those closest to the printer get to use the money first, buying assets like stocks and real estate before prices rise. By the time that money reaches the wage earner at the bottom, prices have already inflated. This is why the stock market can be at an all-time high while the average family struggles to buy a home. It is not a glitch. It is a feature of a currency that can be printed without limit. But the pendulum is starting to swing back. Trust is finite. Today, we see nations in the East hoarding physical gold at record rates, preparing for a post-dollar world. We see a digital generation adopting Bitcoin, a mathematical response to the monetary looseness of 1971. These are not just investment trends. They are votes of no confidence. They are the market trying to heal the wound opened that Sunday evening in August. Nixon said he was protecting the dollar from the speculators. In reality, he turned us all into speculators, forced to gamble just to preserve the value of our labor. The window he closed in 1971 may never reopen. But as the debt clock ticks towards mathematical impossibility, a new question arises. When the faith in paper finally runs out, what will we trust next? I'm Bruno, and it has been a pleasure sharing this chapter with you. If you don't want to miss the next one, subscribe to Money Trail History.